Hello, my name is Miguel Figueroa Rivas, and I am the creator of Shell Theory Fractal Structuralism. Um, Shell Theory Fractal Structuralism is supposed to be a unified field theory, but that is not my call to call it that. I will leave it up to you so that you can uh, decide if this is really it or this has the potential to become the unified field theory we were looking for. I will present the facts of my research, what I found, the results, and just to give you an advance or an understanding of where shell theory came from. I am originally a certified public accountant. I have a master's degree in public accounting, in financial management, sorry, and I have a bachelor degree in public accounting. And I used to work as a forensic accountant, banking auditor, auditing banks in Europe and Latin America. It was up until recently that I decided to change career and study psychology and several masters in the area. But cosmology and physics and quantum physics have always been in my mind, and I've always wanted to become the one who reconcile gravity with quantum mechanics. So I've been studying this privately, independently for 17 years, but actually it's more than that because I've always been interested in this. So since I was a child, when I was 7, I had a near-death experience. And shell theory is a product of that, of what I saw on the other side. Before we get into that, I want to start explaining what shell theory is and what is not. Okay? Why do I dare to claim that we might have, or I might have, reconciled quantum mechanics to gravity or Einstein theory? Okay, so as you can see here, this is um, this is more or less what I saw on the other side. All these fractal structures, it was this golden light, and it was folding on itself. Okay. I remember that everything was black. I wasn't feeling anything. It wasn't fear or emotions. I was just seeing the black, and then the fractal started appearing, and it was something like what you are seeing here. Okay. And then I understood that reality was made of these sparks. I call them sparks back then, or chispazos in Espanol, in Spanish. And then uh, I then I realized that the fractals was coming towards me and they started entering me, and I felt like I was being ripped apart, and then I was backed. Now I understand that it was a process of reintegrating into my conscious body, right? So I spent decades trying to understand what happened here, and shell theory is a product of that. But it's not just mystical or metaphysical. It's not about that. It's about mathematics, and it's about physical laws, and I'm just going to explain all this to you. So what I saw on the other side is that everything in the quantum or Planck world is energy. So you have this golden light, this energetic source, but then we as consciousness, we decide to resist the enthalpy. So I'm going to use a different term for energy, and I'm going to replace Einstein's energy in the equation with enthalpy, but not in the traditional sense that thermodynamics talks about it. It's about a force that seeks to dissolve everything. Okay, it's similar to thermodynamics, but it's not quite it. But it's energy. So it's raw energy. You can measure it in joules or megajoules or pentajoules. Okay, so what happens is that we can decide as conscious beings, or let's not go there yet. We can or the hypermemory. So let's just start with hypermemory. So the hypermemory is just a fabric of reality, space and time. Okay, but space and time as we know it is not really space and time. It's just a fold within the hypermembrane. So what I posit in shell theory is that reality is a 5-dimensional, or I call it dimension 0, super solid enthalpy field with radiant energy. So that's another term I use. I use the term radiant energy or sterile radiance because it felt like that. It felt like it wasn't personal, but it knew me. It wasn't alive, but it was still radiant. So I call it the sterile radiance. And what happens is that all this energy is trying to come into or come up into the space and time or 3D reality, and it cannot fully come here because it is being suppressed by a structure that I call shells. So the shells or husks, if you might know something about this in Kabbalah, is very mystical, but I didn't put this very mystically, okay, because I have mathematics and equations that support this. So what a shell is, if you can translate that into physical laws, a shell, it's something like a knot in space and time. If you remember knot theory, it's more or less like it. But the knot or the shell is formed only when there is resistance to enthalpy. And then you have two realities, right? You have the quantum reality, which is filled with enthalpy, and then you have resistance that forms a shell. But the shell is formed by dividing itself as a membrane from the rest of the membrane and creating these fractal patterns of boundaries. So these boundary fractal patterns that start to resonate at the same frequency, and they become matter. Okay? They entangle together. But this entanglement is nothing bad, according to my theory. This entanglement is just share resonance. So when they match in resonance, they phase lock in and then they entangle. Okay. So from here, you have the two behaviors. So this is what reconciles quantum mechanics to relativistic gravity. So we have the flicker, which is shallow recursion, and then you have the fall, which is deep recursion. And then here is all probabilistic, it's all entangling. It's almost trying to be something, but it never reaches to be something, okay? But then as you get more complexity in the systems, these fractal boundaries interlock, they create a shell. But guess what this shell is? When it stabilizes as a shell, everything comes together. But this shell, this is a foundational shell, or what I call the lambda soliton shell, is the electron. So my theory found that all reality is based on the electron's mass. So the electron is the unit that the geometrical unit, this is not a point-like structure, that actually sets everything in the universe. All matter comes from this, all in my equation comes from the electron mass, and it's replicating fractally and recursively all across my theory. Okay, so, and then when you have this level of complexity and you have electrons knotted in and they start phasing and lock phasing, then you get stable, slow gravitational curve memory-bearing membranes, okay, or faults. So this is the bridge between quantum mechanics and relativity. So if you look at how would a Mandelbrot set look like, this is how it would look like. It will look in 3D. It will look like this. The membrane is being pierced by enthalpy and it starts distending, it starts inflamming. And what you get is these branches like, okay, of energy. Some of them manage to get through the shell, some of them don't, okay? But eventually all shells fail. That's something important also to consider, okay? All shells are going to fail because this enthalpy is trying to get in and you can only hold it for a while. So what we experience as entropy or decay is nothing but the effects of this pressure coming into our shells. My shell as a human being is being deteriorated by this force, and it takes huge amount of effort to keep the shell from falling apart. And this is what metabolism is for. So metabolism is the cost, the ruthless cost of maintaining a biological shell. Okay, so but how is matter formed? So you have entanglement first, and then you have recursion. So for recursion, what do I mean by that? It means by number of folds. So the membrane needs to fall or twist in a way that creates a geometric form. Okay. And what I got from my research is that the folds or the knots are toroidal-like. So when you think about an electron, it's really not like that. It's more like this. I'm gonna try looking for the. It's like this. This is the electron. So the electron has two modes or two phases. And when it reaches a certain recursion, it becomes electromagnetically. But when it reaches, it's slightly perturbed, and this is the image of the electromagnetic coupling, and it acts as a conductor. But then when it's slightly perturbed and the recursion is altered, and you have a delta there, what you are going to find is that the electron behaves like a particle, has gravity, it couples gravitationally. So the electron is going to have two ways of coupling gravitationally and electromagnetically. And this solves, of course, the soliton problem of the Mott problem, because the electron is a soliton. Okay, I call it the lambda soliton. There are other particles. I'm going to explain that later. But there are many particles, but all particles are just a different recursion. But the only one stable enough to form matter is the electron. Okay, in the way that we know matter. Okay, and then you have something like this, and what we experience as gravity is nothing else but an tension in the membrane. So the hypermembrane is being it experiences torsion, bending, and knots are pulling space and time together. So it's not like there is a force, a magical force of gravity. It's not like that. It's very something very physical what is happening here. And then you have this. And this bending of space and time is simply the complexity of the knots together. Okay. So, and this is playing electromagnetism, weak force, strong force, and gravity. And also what I found is that the constants are going to start changing. Why? Because the universe, and now we're touching cosmology, the universe is a stretching membrane. So think of it as a band that is stretching. Okay? What we experience of the Hubble constant is simply the space in between the things inside that band, located in the band, expanding. But nothing is really moving. It's expanding. So of course, the Hubble constant was less when the universe was born than to what is now, because now there is more space in the universe, or the membrane is relaxing and stretching. Okay. And this is okay I found that the electron needs to have the recursion of 12.87 to create and explain dark energy. And this matches accuracy of 99.7%. So I think that I successfully derived dark matter. These are some simulations about the electron as a soliton with a geometric magnetic field and the vector potential. We're not going to get into this now. We're going to keep explaining the theory. Okay, and then we experienced this is all that it is. It's just the fractal boundaries interacting together as electrons, right? And you have this, then you create a man, then you create an ecosystem, and then a planetary biosphere. And everything that is mass is simply tension, okay? Everything that is mass is simply tension. So that means that my mass is simply a small point of tension in the whole web, infinite web of the cosmos, right? All these filaments. So in this scenario, a black hole a black hole is just an anchor point foundationally and structurally, fractally, for a higher universe. So shell theory agrees with the multiverse theory, but not like that. There are no hidden dimensions, and it's not like that. It's simply that you have a compacted universe below the other one on top. It's just like these nested dolls, right? So a black hole is just a tension point that is the anchor of the next universe. So everything is interconnected. And you can have infinite universe, one less or more compressed than the others. And this is one of the most important equations in shell theory, and this is the scalar operator terming infinity. And what this does is that it takes something like a black hole, which, by the way, is not an infinity. Shell theory doesn't believe in infinities. It's a rupture in space and time. It bends itself and it stretches so much that space and time rips and then falls back into the membrane. Okay, so it's circulating again the flicker without getting the flicker ever. That's why it has a refresh rate of 0 or time 0. Okay, so something that is just a monster gravitationally, and this becomes through the scalar operator mathematically as a higher shell anchor point or pillar of a higher universe. Okay. Also important to know that in shell theory we work with integrals. And we don't work with summations because that is one of the biggest problems of the standard model. The standard model was thinking about summation. And one of the things that I try to offer physics to see differently is that the whole is not the sum of the parts. This is first year psychology class. The whole is bigger than the summation of the parts, or is other than, okay? Because we are dealing with integrals. Okay, you restructure and you integrate them. Okay, the only thing we can see here or in this reality are just the curvature. That's why everything looks smooth, because it's the same membrane bent on itself. Okay, we already talked about this, and now we're going to talk something very important, which is how does the flicker or the enthalpy breaking into the membrane can ever become a knot or an electron? And the answer is in fluid dynamics. In fluid dynamics, we know, and in the latest experiments with supervortices in supersolids, we know that the spiral or the golden ratio it just emerges normally in nature when you have the input of a fluid, and then it dissipates resistance. And this is why it's so important in shell theory, because everything is scaled according to the golden ratio, and my mathematics prove it. Okay, so this is more or less what I was explaining before about you have the flickers that coalesce into fractal boundaries and resonate each other's, and then it links to other, but then they are compressed and they are just part of the same web that other galaxies and universes are. But it's so also compacted, it's all compressed. Think of it like a PDF file, okay? You can compress it, okay? And that changes the time. So I have some equations for time. You can look at them at the paper, but the important take on this is that time dilation exists because of something that I call the refresh rate, or the movement, the flux of energy that enters that shell. And the important also thing here is that, shell theory also deals with asymmetries as inequalities. So the inequalities and the inequality algebra is born from the integrals of the theory. And this is what some physicists are not going to like, that consciousness is infrastructure. Okay? Consciousness is everything. This flicker, this light is aware, but not in the same way you and I are. It's different. But it has the potential of being aware. And when you fall more and more parts of the membrane, then that potential through recursion becomes something like a human being conscious and aware. but everything is proto-aware. That means that even a rock has the potential to be conscious, but it just doesn't get there. And I have some equations also in the series. You can check in the link about that. How mathematically a rock is different in terms of consciousness. If you say that then density awareness or density in mass creates consciousness, that's not what Shell theory is saying. What Shell theory is saying that you need to have complexity and you need to have some sort of recursion to trap that consciousness is. So it's about trapping consciousness or trapping flickers, as you saw here, if I remember correctly. You know, the bend in space and time is trapping the flickers. And this create the vortices in spiral-like, okay? Now we're gonna go to scaling law, which is also one of the most important things in shell theory, and it's this, okay? So here you have the golden ratio, and this is the recursion exponent, okay? And this creates my mass ladder. What I found is, see if it's, no, it's gonna be here. What I found is that this, and if you have that equation, okay, you can calculate or derive the mass of the electron, the mass of the proton, and all other particles. I'm looking for, because I don't know where I put it, the slide on that, where all the recursion are. Okay, here it is. So you can see how, you know, as the smallest a particle is, the bigger the recursion, okay? This is the progressive. So I derive all the masses with my equation, okay? And I'm trying to look at it. One moment. This is the research paper you can find in the link that I just put down there. And this is the time dilation equation, as I was explaining. And what I'm saying is mass is capture resistance, okay? And this is the integral of the shell. And this replaces mass in Einstein's equation EMC squared. And here you have the time, the local time versus the time in general versus the inner time of the shell. You can see it's in both places, which means that it relies on itself. It is recursive, okay? It's infinite, but without reaching infinities equations, which is the best part of shell theory, because you don't have singularities, you don't have infinities, you have brackets. We're gonna get to the brackets in a while, okay? This is the gravity equation, okay? Are replacing Einstein tensors with recursion. That's it. You don't really need them. Before we get into that, I want to explain how I calculate the mass to get the recursion ladder. To go down. And now the most mind-blowing discoveries of shell theory. The Higgs boson is not a particle. It is the energy suppressed inside the electron. When the electron forms, it contains energy. And what they found at the Hadron Collider was not a particle. It's just what you get when you rip apart the electron and you liberate the energy compressed. Yes. And this is the equation, okay? So this is the equation to calculate the n number. You can see here that I'm using the mass between the mass Planck in relationship to the golden ratio. And what you get is that number that I had before, 12.87, is the steps that the energetic charge in the Higgs boson takes to, or is suppressed in relationship to the electron. So if you subtract 53.54 minus 40.646, you are going to have 12, you're going to get 12.87. Okay, so that means that the Planck energy is being suppressed, and that's why we don't get that energy here. So this is the rescaled recursion ladder. Now the electron is no longer 12.87, but you don't need that because we are not working at these levels of materiality. We are working at higher levels, okay, in the electron. So the electron is always going to have 12.87, but if you measure the depth of the electron here towards Ornate relationship versus Planck energy, it's higher on that scale. So this is an eigenvalues, okay, scale, but it's also a ladder. This is my recursion ladder. And with this, the most incredible thing happened. This is how it all got unified, because this means this, that the discrepancy in dark energy observed versus the Planck energy is because you have countless shells suppressing that energy. And my projections have a certainty or an accuracy of 99.7%. You can recalculate if you want. This is the suppression factor, the golden ratio to the exponent 2 times the electron's recursion number, which is 12.87, and you get 203,934. And now you also get gravity. So that means that gravity is the curvature of space and time when the energy is suppressed. Okay. And we already talked about the Higgs boson. My projection says that the Higgs boson should have 122.4 and was measured at 125. But again, this isn't a particle. This is the energy the electron is containing, suppressed and compressed. When you unbind the electron, that energy is released, and the Higgs boson is nothing but an excitation of that in the field. It's not really a particle, and it doesn't give mass because mass doesn't exist. The only thing that exists, believe it or not, is the bending and the tension in the space-time, which means that gravity is just tension, okay? It's just you being pulled and pulled in the membrane. Okay, and another simulation I did and found that galaxies in general should have some types of galaxies should have dark matter halos. My prediction is that that's going to be in 20 MeVs, okay, more or less around that. And what happens with the galaxies and the winding problem? That you have a universe. Let's see if I can illustrate it better. So let's look at it like this. You have a universe, which is a fold containing several folds, and it's also an anchor point of higher folds, something like this, and it's so recursively folding in on itself, transferring energy, which is tension. It's stored inside the tension of the curvatures. And so my prediction is you cannot have an isotropic universe. It's impossible in Shell theory. The universe should be anisotropy. Sorry. So what this means is that the axis of evil is real. Why? Because the universe is a membrane that is being pierced by enthalpy. And the Big Bang never happened. What happened was that you had the membrane resistant on enthalpy. It created a shell. It sealed itself from the enthalpy, and as it was sealing itself, a lot of energy got in. But then, you had some quantization in those entering points, and that is what galaxies are today. And the scabs of that wound is dark matter and the galaxies. So that means that you're going to have like a trail of life or galaxies in the filaments, and that is just not random. It's not isotropic. Why? Because it's a membrane that has scars on it and it's stretching. Okay. Okay. And the final prediction, or most staggering prediction of Shell theory, is the electron signature. Okay, and refresh rate, which I measured. So the electron should have a 73.9 picoseconds refresh rate, and it should have a frequency of 2.15 gigahertz. Okay, so this should be impossible in physics. So if any of you experimental physicists come up with an experiment to measure this, I think right now it's impossible for us. But at some point we could do it. It would be great. But the dark matter experiment is, I think, quite well. We have the data, but we just need better telescopes, and we also need to prove that the axis of evil is real and it's not just an noise or interference in the telescopes, right? Okay, so well, this is it. If you have any questions, just drop in the comments. You can send me an email also. I'm more than happy and interested in keep talking about shell theory and in explaining it and in interacting with you. So thank you for being here today, and I hope you have enjoyed the video. If you like, just click like and subscribe and leave your comments. I'll be happy to hear them.